Gregory held his hands about 2 feet apart to indicate the size of the stack of letters he received from others claiming to be Hughes' long-lost relatives. Oh yeah, when there's death and money on the table, they all come out. Hi, Jeff Mersanti, the Plain English Attorney, and today we've got an interesting one, and this is about the estate of Howard Hughes. Well, he died a long time ago, but the reason this kind of triggered something in my head to say, okay, let's go ahead and do a video on this, is I'm still the biggest hit on my law firm's website is this article that I did back in 2010 about the estate of Howard Hughes and what a mess it was because he didn't have a written plan. And we'll go ahead and we'll put that as a link in the description for the video below. But also, only about a few weeks ago, a woman called up and was basically yelling and screaming at my assistant that she did a DNA test and she's an heir of Howard Hughes and she demanded to get a share of his estate and she knows we're the attorneys who are handling that estate and you're going to do this for me and you're going to do this for me. She hung up on her. Well, okay, I'm not running the estate of Howard Hughes. I just wrote an article on it. But what that really reminded me is there were a lot of crazy people coming out of the woodwork trying to get part of his estate. I've got my article, and please go ahead and check it out. But really, one of the best definitive articles on this is from the Washington Post going back to 1981. So what I'm going to do is go through it along with some commentary, and really, you just got to be shaking your head. And it really is true. There's nothing like death and money on the table to make people go a little crazy. So now I'm quoting from this article from the Washington Post by Pete Bruton from September 5th, 1981. Now, the article I had was about how Howard Hughes' estate ended up getting settled 34 years later. And even when I did the article, it was almost there. It wasn't quite there. It was almost there. And that was back in 2010. So keep that in mind. And the article is Jury Divvies Howard Hughes' Fortune After an Air Raid, H-E-I-R raid, in Texas court. More than 5 years after the late billionaire Howard Hughes died, the division of his vast estate was finally determined today in a small Texas courtroom. Well, the estate might have been determined, but it wasn't finished or liquidated because I did that article, 29 years later.
If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel.
After 7 weeks of testimony, some of it carried out in a circus atmosphere, the show finally closed tonight when a Harris County probate court jury decided that the paternal heirs are 3 granddaughters of Hughes' uncle, Rupert Hughes, and 2 of the uncle's stepchildren. The verdict means the 3 sisters, Chris Roberts, 57, of Cleveland, Beth DePould, 56, of San Francisco, and Barbara Cameron, 55, of Los Angeles, each will get 6 1/3% of the estate. The one living stepdaughter, Alvis Hughes McIntyre, 80, of Montgomery, Alabama, will get 4 3/4% of the estate, as will the heirs of her late brother, Rush. The value of the estate has been conservatively estimated at $500 million. The 3 sisters had been challenged by nearly 600 people, claiming that their mother, Elspeth, was not Rupert's legitimate daughter. Okay. Now, this is a quote from one of the daughters, Roberts. "I knew all along my mother was legitimate," said Roberts. "The money makes me happy," she said, "but it makes me happier that my mother's name is cleared." DePould said she was delighted with the decision, but had not given much thought to what she would do with the money. Cameron joked, and this is one of the reasons I work with my clients to help avoid probate. Cameron joked about the lawyers getting most of the proceeds, and then said more seriously, "Our grandchildren will get it." Okay. One of their attorneys said the money probably would be distributed in about 2 years. Okay, this was 1981. In about 2 years would have been 1983. In 2010, I wrote an article about how the estate was still not closed. Okay. Even considering the inevitable appeals and other legal roadblocks that remained. 2 years. Generally, in such cases, attorneys work for a contingency fee of about 40% of the proceeds. Oh, wow. Imagine that. McIntyre, a widow, was not present when the verdict was reached. The magistrate in the case, probate judge Pat Gregory, had already determined that Hughes' paternal heirs, about 16 first cousins or their estates, would receive 71.5% of the estate under a pre-trial agreement between the paternal and maternal sides of the family. And so, with what seems to be only a few snippets of legal red tape yet to be clipped, the final chapter in the legendary life and death of the reclusive billionaire ended. Oh yeah, just a few minor points that would take another 29 years to settle. The final chapter was as bizarre at times as the life of the man who made it all happen. Here's how it went in these last 7 weeks in Judge Gregory's courtroom, and here's where the ridiculousness comes in. The mother of Howard Hughes was Aline Gano Hughes, the daughter of a prominent Dallas judge. She was the embodiment of charm and refinement. She died in 1922 at age 39 from complications after minor surgery. The woman before Judge Gregory, almost 60 years later, was in her early 60s. The left side of her curly hair was blonde, the right side black, apparently a combination of 2 different wigs. On top sat a straw hat festooned with multicolored feathers. Her silver blouse bore a large Confederate flag on the back. Over that, she wore a gold lame jacket which was split down the back to reveal the flag. She had on tan silk culottes along with sandals, but no hose. One pair of glasses perched on her nose, and a larger pair of sunglasses covered those. So she was double wearing her glasses. Another pair was stuck on the brim of her hat. She was weighed down with necklaces, bracelets, charms, and assorted turquoise jewelry, and large long-looped rings dangled from her ears. A camera hung from her neck. Okay. So, just to recap, she's making a claim that she's Howard Hughes' mother. She was in her 60s. Howard Hughes' mother was almost 40 when she died 60 years ago. Okay. She claims she had dated Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy and had been caught by her husband in bed with Elvis Presley. She said she is the mother of Howard Hughes, come to claim her rightful inheritance. Okay. She was not alone. More than 600 alleged wives, sons, daughters, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth cousins lined up in Gregory's small courtroom on the 5th floor of the Family Law Center on the north edge of downtown Houston with their hands out, trying to claim a share of the Hughes fortune. Just like the person yelling and screaming at my assistant over the phone 13 years after I wrote the initial article, thinking I somehow or another was the attorney. Let me tell you, I wasn't even in college, let alone law school, back in 1981. So, no, we didn't handle the estate. And those were just the ones who showed up in person or sent a lawyer. Gregory held his hands about 2 feet apart to indicate the size of the stack of letters he received from others claiming to be Hughes' long-lost relatives. Oh yeah, when there's death and money on the table, they all come out. What brought the strange parade of petitioners to Houston was the lure of money. Lots of it. Howard Robard Hughes Jr. died on April 5th, 1976 on a flight from Acapulco to Houston, where he was to have medical treatment. Estimates of the Hughes estate have run from a low of $168.8 million by Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith, hired by the executors of the estate, for whom a low valuation would mean lower federal estate taxes, to $465 million by the Internal Revenue Service, to $1.1 billion by the state of California. But a large part of the estate consists of prime undeveloped land in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, whose value is inestimable until it is sold. So no one really knows how much the entire estate is worth, but it's enough, as one lawyer said, to buy you a chicken fried steak with cream gravy. All right. In doing my research for that other article, there were all of these other jurisdictions that were trying to claim that Hughes' estate was supposed to be administered in their court so that they could get some money from it. And I'm sure some of the arguments were being put forth by attorneys who wanted to get a piece of the action. So, okay, it's where he was a resident is what really matters when it comes to an estate. So where did he reside when he died? Well, okay, it was Texas. But he was in Acapulco. Went to California. Died on the flight back to Texas. So California, and I believe it was Nevada that he was flying over on the way to Texas, and at the moment he died. And then Texas were all, no, the estate needs to be administered here so that we can collect our taxes because he died here, so that's what we want to do. So all of these states were claiming jurisdiction because he was on an airplane. Okay. So really, even the states back then wanted to get a piece of it because of the estate taxes, and it was enough for them to try to contest things. Now, what made all of this all the more ridiculous is that he didn't have a good, properly drafted, well, it should have been a revocable trust. I mean, even at that point, revocable trusts were out there and available. In fact, the first trust ever to be done in the United States, you might remember this lawyer's name. It was a long, long time ago, even before it was the United States. The lawyer was named Patrick Henry, and he did a revocable living trust for the lieutenant governor of the colony of Virginia. So it's not like these things weren't around, but the revocable living trust would have avoided all the probate part of it. No, didn't have anything. But that didn't mean that people weren't coming out of the woodwork trying to claim that they had a written will. All right, let's keep going with the article. In Texas, the estate of someone who dies without a valid will is divided among any surviving spouse and children. The first contender out of the chute was former Hollywood starlet Terry Moore. She said she married Hughes in 1949 at the age of 20 in a civil ceremony performed by a ship's captain in international waters off California. Oh, really? The records of this marriage were dumped overboard, she said. Oh, okay. And the marriage was kept secret to protect her Hollywood image as a naive, innocent young thing. Yeah. Further, she claimed Hughes fathered her child, who was born in Germany in 1952 but died shortly afterward. Since then, though, she has married and divorced 3 other men, including Glenn Davis, the famous Army halfback. So, football player. Gregory threw out her claim without even letting a jury consider it. Okay. So, it's not limited to just people off the street, but actual Hollywood stars, or former stars. Then came a woman who called herself Halise Hughes from Atlantic City, New Jersey. She burst into tears outside the courtroom when asked to supply identification before being admitted. She said Hughes married her in 1946 and asked her to take the name of Jean Peters, the actress who was Hughes' second wife, whom he married in 1957 and divorced in 1971. Okay. So he wanted her to take a name of someone that he was going to marry in the future. Okay. Hughes married his first wife, Ella Rice, in 1925 and later divorced her in 1929. No children resulted from either marriage. Later, Elise Hovespian said Hughes raped her when she was in a mental institution. So she was formerly in a mental institution. Gregory dismissed her claim. The last alleged spouse to present her claim was a 71-year-old woman who called herself Alma Hughes. She was not represented by an attorney, but Gregory allowed her to speak. In a thin, wavering voice that sometimes rose to near hysteria and cracked with tears, she claimed that Hughes fathered her child, who was born in 1954 and died in 1965. Hughes married her on December 12, 1973, only after she agreed to be artificially inseminated by him. She was artificially inseminated at the same time she had hemorrhoid surgery, and at the age of 64, bore Hughes a son. The child was given up to charity. Okay? Hughes lost a foot in his famous near-fatal air crash in 1946 and had a peg leg. His autopsy, which made no mention of this, was falsified, she claimed. Okay? Hughes had 17 working for him. Again, I think they might have used a different word today, but remember, this article from the Washington Post was back in 1981. And finally, claiming God as her witness, Hovespian said Hughes was, quote, awfully rough in bed with a woman. On the other hand, Terry Moore said in interviews that Hughes was the best lover she ever had. Gregory threw out Hovespian's claim. So, these were just the widows, let alone everybody else claiming to have been in the bloodline. So these supposed widows who married him with absolutely no proof, no documentation, just coming to the court and crying and yelling and screaming. So the court had to take all of this up because it was in probate. So all of this ridiculousness ended up costing money out of the estate to just push these claims away. If this was in a revocable living trust, it wouldn't have been there in the first place, at least not for all of that money. Donald E. McDonald of Los Angeles, who also calls himself Richard Robard Hughes, claimed Hughes adopted him in 1953 in Ventura, California. McDonald happened to be married at the time. Gregory dismissed his claim. Then came the strangest one of them all, as if these weren't strange to begin with. Claire Benedict Hudenberg from Las Vegas, who claimed to be Hughes' illegitimate daughter. She was not present in court, and the only testimony given was a sworn deposition read by a lawyer. Among other things, Hudenberg claimed that she is clairvoyant, can hear things from another world, and was a king in 3 previous incarnations. Harold Robbins' novel The Carpetbaggers revealed to her that she is Hughes' daughter. She bears a remarkable physical resemblance to Hughes, lived next door to him in the Bahamas in 1969, and then moved to a house in California once owned by Hughes. Someone put arsenic in her swimming pool and cyanide on her roof, and 25 men with great big necks followed her around Las Vegas trying to take her picture. Why would all these things have occurred if she were not indeed Howard Hughes' daughter, she wondered. Gregory was not persuaded by the force of her logic. But then there were people with serious claims. Okay, so there was all of that stuff just coming out of the woodwork, but the people with the serious claims, with no surviving spouse, child, parent, or sibling. Again, this is now under Texas law for who is the next of kin, because Hughes didn't have a valid, at least last will and testament presented. With no surviving spouse, child, parent, or sibling, the estate was divided between the mother's side of the family and the father's, beginning with direct descendants from the grandparents. Those inheriting from Hughes' maternal side were nailed down in court without any opposition. Hughes' mother had 1 brother and 2 sisters. The brother had 5 children and the sisters had 4 each. One of the cousins is Will Loomis, 52, whom some liken to his cousin Howard. A former lawyer with the Houston firm of Andrews, Kurth, Campbell, and Jones, Loomis runs what remains of the Hughes empire from Las Vegas. He is credited with reversing the sinking financial fortune of the Summa Corporation, the holding company of most of the assets of the estate, including several Las Vegas gambling casinos and hotels and land. He is currently battling the IRS over a $274.7 million federal estate tax bill. So far, the estate has paid out in excess of $100 million to the federal government, raised from the sale of casinos, land, and Hughes Air West. So, back then, the estate tax amounts and limits, it was considerably easier to impose an estate tax. But really, for this type of fortune, once you hit the taxable, it doesn't take much to hit that taxable threshold, and then it's just huge. So, when they're arguing to value the estate at, going from, say, $1 billion and trying to argue it down to $500 million, really you're talking about saving about 40 to 45% of the difference of $500 million. That's a lot of money, and it was an awful lot more money back in the mid-70s and early 80s. So determining the paternal heirs was another matter altogether. That's the question the jury had to consider. 3 people claiming to be grandchildren of Hughes' uncle and 2 of the uncle's stepchildren and 2 contending sets of cousins fought it out before Judge Gregory and the jury. The 3 grandchildren said they descended from Hughes' late uncle Rupert Hughes, the celebrated Hollywood author. One of the groups of cousins, numbering around 400, are 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th cousins descended from Hughes' great-grandfather Joshua. They come mostly from the Midwest, Iowa and Missouri, with a few from Texas and California. All of them were rounded up by the Nashville genealogist Bill Jones. They claimed Uncle Rupert had the mumps as a child and was sterile. They claimed his daughter Elspeth, the mother of the contesting grandchildren, was the product of an affair by Rupert's first wife, Agnes. Thus, they said there are no true descendants from the Hughes' paternal grandparents, and the estate should pass to descendants of the great-grandparents. So, all of this, from even the legitimate family members, got called into question because they were going to question the paternity of the legitimate heirs so that they could step in and get their piece of the action. Okay. About 100 people showed up claiming to be the great-grandfather's descendants. A typical interview between them and a reporter went something like this. Who are you? We're the true blood heirs. Why are you here? We're the true blood heirs. Can you prove it? Oh, you ought to see the evidence we've got. May I? You just wait. So, if they supposedly have all this evidence, why can't they present it? Well, I don't know. But they faced a major barrier, the, quote, presumption of legitimacy given in Texas to any child born while the father is married to the mother, as was the case with Elspeth. To prove illegitimacy, there had to be clear and convincing evidence. The father was sterile or did not have access to the mother when conception occurred. All right, so this is probably a good point to talk about the different the different levels of evidence. The preponderance of the evidence is, basically, if we're going to boil it down to numbers, it's got to be like more than 50%. It's more believable than not. Yeah, I believe them. Maybe it's a close call, maybe not, but okay, this is the direction we're going. Then there's the beyond a reasonable doubt. The best way to put that is you're like 99.9% sure that this is the direction it's going. Clear and convincing falls between it. So basically you got to say, yeah, we're about 2/3 convinced. So it's a higher barrier than, okay, if you got to pick between 1 and 2, it's close, but yeah, I believe them. No. It's got to be more. It's got to be a bigger barrier, and they've got to prove the sterility or that they didn't have access to the mother. So let's just say father is overseas in the military for an entire year, non-stop, comes back and the wife is giving birth. Well, wait a minute. Full year, 9 months. Somebody else had to have been impregnating her in that 3-month period when he was away. There was no way that they could have been conceived. So that's what they're talking about with the clear and convincing evidence. Right. The cousins relied on an application by Rupert to the Sons of the American Revolution in which he left blank the space in which the children were to be listed, and the testimony of several cousins who said they heard Rupert say he could not have children. Okay? Again, not really clear and convincing, but at that point it's up for a jury to decide. The other group of cousins, numbering about 160, mostly from Alabama with a few from Tennessee and Texas, said Uncle Rupert had a daughter, all right, but it wasn't Elspeth. They said it was a Layla Babcock Hughes, who, they say, drowned in a swimming pool at Rupert's house in California in 1921. The leader of this group is Robert C. Hughes, a silent, dour man who teaches agriculture at a high school in Alabama. He claimed that Hughes' grandfather, Felix T. Hughes, was really Felix Moner Hughes. The story goes back 150 years and takes 3 hours to explain, he says. In about 5 minutes, the Washington Post boiled it down. It goes something like this. Felix Moner and Felix T. were friends in Kentucky. One of Felix Moner's brothers killed one of Felix T.'s brothers. The two Hughes families, not related, split over that in the Civil War. Felix Moner, whose sympathies lay with the North, left his family and joined Felix T.'s family and took his name also. Somewhere down the line, the first Felix T. died, leaving Felix Moner as the only Felix T. The new Felix T. then got into a fight with his old father over money. This precipitated a split in the old and new Felix T. Hughes clans, with the old group going to Alabama, from whence the Robert C. Hughes group of cousins is descended. The new Felix T. Hughes went to Missouri, giving rise to the group of 400 cousins and Rupert and Howard Hughes Sr. The story of Rupert's stepchildren is not as complicated as the tale of Felix T. and Felix Moner, but it is peculiar. Again, all of the craziness coming out of the woodwork. In addition to Agnes, Uncle Rupert had 2 other wives. The second one, Adelaide, had 2 children, a daughter, Avis, and a son, Rush, when she married Rupert. Okay, so this is a stepchild situation. Adelaide committed suicide on a cruise to China by hanging herself in her cabin. Rupert's third wife, actress and writer Patterson Dial, died from an overdose of sleeping pills. It was claimed that Avis Hughes McIntyre and her brother Rush were adopted by Rupert. It turned out that Rupert never legally adopted them, but they were included in the pre-trial agreement between the maternal and paternal sides of the family. So what, were they legitimate? Well, there's no documentation. They weren't legally adopted. But hey, look, this just proves another point that when you've got this huge argument in this huge court battle, if you come to an agreement and the court's like, okay, everybody's happy with this, all right, so everybody agreed that they were to be included as stepchildren that were adopted, even though they weren't adopted, okay, truth doesn't matter when we have a legal agreement saying otherwise. Okay. So, the 3 sisters who successfully claimed to be children of Rupert are Roberts, the wife of an industrial engineer from Cleveland, a talkative live wire who goes by Chris. I Hate Agnes. Beth DePold, smart and energetic, the wife of a San Francisco engineer, and Cameron, serious and determined, the wife of a Los Angeles real estate broker. Each one of them stands to get about $32 million. All right, great. Chris says she never met or saw Howard Hughes. Beth said she saw him once. It was in New York. The elevator opened and there he was, but we didn't get in. Barbara says she was introduced to Hughes once at a Los Angeles restaurant by Rupert, the uncle. And here's the good closing line of the article. Chris works at a skating rink in Cleveland. What would she do with her money? Quote, I'm going to buy the place where I work, she said, and burn it down. Okay. So all of this huge mess back in 1981 when this article was written, oh yeah, it's only going to be a couple of years and it's done. 2010. All those years later, 29 years later, it still wasn't done, but we were almost there. If all of this was in a revocable living trust, it would have been handled. Now, I'm just going to throw out there that there's a comparison, and I should probably do a review of this estate, even though I did an article way back when. The estate of Michael Jackson. Everybody made it sound like, oh, this is such a mess, it's such a mess, we're going to court, we're going to court, we're going to court. When they went to court, it was over the custody of the children. Because Michael, who had sole custody of his 3 children, wanted his mom to actually raise the kids. There was nothing about the money. Nothing. No contest about the money at all. It was all inside a revocable living trust. He did that plan the right way. Howard Hughes probably had as much money in 1976 dollars when he died, if not more, and he left a mess. So, I hope you found that information entertaining and hopefully useful. If you want to check out more information on avoiding probate, that's really a lot of what my firm focuses on when we're doing planning. It's avoiding probate court using revocable living trust. Go ahead to livingtrustlawfirm.com and check that out. We'll also put the links to the Washington Post story as well as the story that I've got on the website. Check it out. Again, it's entertaining to see this as a mess and what can happen if you don't plan, but please do plan. So as I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life, and whatever you do, make it a great day.